Ho, 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 welcome back. This is Illiterate. This week we are covering Lord of the Rings. Finally, my name is Evan. I have been checking out the brand new show on Amazon. I am hanging out with my buddy Taylor.
Hello, I have gotten deep into Lord of the Rings history.
We took a little bit of an extended break. A few things have happened, a few life things, some sickness, but we are back with you. And this has always been on the docket, and baby, it wasn't moving. So today, I need this show because I'm a casual Lord of the Rings fan. I didn't start watching them until I saw the first one the week I left college. So I'm new to all of this. I saw all of the films then, but I'm not a super fan. I haven't seen the Hobbit films, but I've started this one. We're weeks into this now. And Taylor, I'm lost. Taylor, I am so lost. I need so much help. And so I knew this was coming around the corner. And if you're lost like me, or if you're confused about any of this stuff, I think this is going to be an interesting show. I'm excited because we're starting off the right way. I think, and if you know the show, you know where we're going. We're going right to the source, baby. Tolkien, baby. I am ready to talk about the origins of this stuff so that I can start really breaking down this story in my head, because it's too big, it's too massive, it's too important to so many people. So I don't know, let's buckle up. But this is the beginning of our 3-part series. Lord, we haven't done one of those in a second. We're back, baby.
Question and answer here. Will I pronounce all of the Lord of the Rings characters correctly? No.
Nay.
Will I pronounce the name of the author correctly? Yes, it's Tolkien is how it goes. So from here on out, I will do my best. J.R.R. His family called him Ronald, which is the first R, and we'll just call him Tolkien because I didn't know him. But that's what, if you were close to him, he's old Ron
old
to
Ron.
The fam and friends. The timeline, because that's important, 1892 was when he was born and died in 73. So he had the potential to see some of the weirder adaptations, which we will get to at the end, but this is going to be the bulk of his life influences and process for making all of this happen. The word of the day to know with all of this is philologist, which is what he was officially. Do you know that word at all?
No, I've never heard this word before.
So that's how he paid the bills. It is the study of language and its oral and written historical sources. So going back to based on the Latin of this, which came from the meaning of this, which originated from the ancient Gaelic this.
That's like our show.
Yeah. That's what he did, but with languages, the invention being the foundation. And so we'll see as we go along how Lord of the Rings fits into all this. To me, backwards from the way you write a story, but that's what he was into. So in terms of being an actual philologist, he was a teacher. He worked at Oxford in various positions.
It's starting to make sense already.
Yeah, already. But yeah, he was a college professor from 25 until his retirement in 59, and that's the bulk of his work efforts. And then this is almost like a fun side hobby, but we'll get into that in a second. Starting off with his upbringing, and I just think it's funny because there's so much in my mind to do with lineage and families, and this person begat this person in this era. Huge family lineage of the Tolkiens going back to 1620 of some sort of importance. He was all into that with his own family, tracing it back into
very cool,
British history.
Would have been on that ancestry.com.
And there would have been a lot of them. Yeah. He was born in South Africa, which I thought was a fun little tidbit. And because his dad was promoted to the head of a British bank there, which I feel like we see this over and over again somehow. He went to England with his mom and his brother for a trip at an early age, and his dad died still back in South Africa.
Oh, no.
And so the family has limited income. They move around the country with various family members. Him and his brother and his mom. One of the funniest places that they stayed at was at his Aunt Jane's, and her farm is named Bag End, which is the Shire location. So he one for one cribbed that name for his story. and
All
there's a lot
right,
of stuff
first
like
one
that.
down.
Yeah, yeah. But he's trolloping around the English countryside, which gives him an appreciation for all of that. A bit more of a naturalist for his time as opposed to other people,
I'm spark
which
in
yeah.
the course of our three-part series, I will be checking out the 2019 film Tolkien with Nicholas Holt.
Oh,
So
interesting. Yeah.
I'll be paying close attention this episode to then compare, and I'll report back in
Please,
next
yeah.
episodes. But this biopic was done not too long ago. And it went a little bit under the radar, so I'm flagging this, and we'll come back to it later.
Yeah, see if they pull any of this stuff. I'm sure Bag End will will be in
Mm-hmm,
there at
mm-hmm,
least.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he was homeschooled by his mom, and this is where he developed his love of languages and reading. She dies super early of
Oh
diabetes
no.
at the age of 34.
Oh
And
no.
he's 12. And so what's bizarre about this is that's basically the age you can sustain if you have diabetes without any sort of insulin treatment, because that would not be discovered until 20 years later. So
Oh,
she was just 20
wow.
years too short of any sort of treatment for it. And that's pretty much her type of diabetes, what you could sustain without that.
Wow.
So then, semi orphaned, he's in the guardianship of friends and family from age 12 onwards, and hanging out with his cousins and rest of the family. Like I said, languages. This is where he starts to be super interested in his teens. He invented a language called Nebbish with his cousins, which isn't
Oh,
that
cool.
advanced. It's more of just a word replacement-y sort of thing.
Like a code.
Yeah, yeah, essentially. But he
Still, that's how you
started
gotta start somewhere.
yeah, yeah. But you could see the inklings of his fascination with it. Developed one of his own. He also learned Esperanto, which is the completely made up language, not tied to any
Hmm.
culture. I don't know if you'd heard of that. It was purported to
No.
be sort of the universal language because it wasn't linked to any culture or people. It still exists and you can learn it, but it didn't turn into like everybody being on the same number system or whatever.
It's
It's
like it was
kind of
made in a lab.
exactly, exactly, and so that'll tie into some of what he's curious about with languages, but,
Mhm.
uh, furthering on in his life, age 19, he goes on this summer holiday in Switzerland. Big party of 12, hiking and camping, and
Mm.
b he says that a big part of Bilbo's journey through the Misty Mountains in The Hobbit is based on this experience that he had
Aw.
as a
Aw.
teenager, going through the Misty Mountains of Switzerland. So that's another, personal connection
What
and
a
life
trip.
experience. Yeah, exactly. Kind
Wow.
of the pre-college sojourn around Europe. So
Yeah.
then right after that he goes to study at Oxford, and World War One starts, boom, 1914. And he was in a program that would delay his enlistment until he completed his degree. So that's what he ended up doing, and then was sent to
Hmm.
France in 1916 and fought big battles. Most of his friends and schoolmates were killed during the war, and
Oh,
this is a
no.
huge part of
Yeah.
Sauron's army and the the war taking over and evil
Oh, wow.
corrupting the land and all that. He
Yeah.
was in the trenches. He was in it,
So
and
and
yeah.
this is the extent of my knowledge of him.
Mhm.
Growing up in schools, the movies were incredibly popular, and all my friends were reading the books. That was the story was, oh, he was in World War I, and he got all the ideas basically from that. Um,
Uh-huh.
but I've never looked any further into it, and like I said, I never had any contact with any of the material until rather
Yeah, yeah.
recently. So it's just this glimmer right here that we're just touching on is the only sentence of this that I was really aware of before
Yeah.
this week.
Well, and it is the biggest bullet point because it is the most direct parallel in terms of
Right.
his
No, I
life
mean it
experience and the
it
conflict of
immediately
the
makes
stories,
sense for
yeah.
all of the world building, the setting, the generational aspect of it. But like I've never heard that he was fully orphaned, basically. Like that's
Yeah.
shocking. Like before 15, at 12, he is orphaned. I've never heard that little ditty about his backstory. I'm like, that's pretty major too. When like that could start the sentence of, well, he was an orphan and fought in World War II. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah, yeah.
interesting what makes it in, what doesn't. And this guy already, we've just gotten to the sentence I understand of him, and I've already learned so much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, Sam Gamgee he said, is a direct reflection of the English
Ah.
soldier, so far superior to myself. He was saying which, my favorite character in the whole deal, the
Mhm.
sacrificial best friend, willing to do
Mhm.
anything, bearing the weight of the world on his shoulders. He sees that in his friends and
Mm.
comrades. He got really sick, contracted trench fever, and spent recovery doing hospital duties, so then also sees the knockoff effects of
Mm.
the
Oh
wounded
gosh.
as well in World War One. This is where he starts writing this Book of Lost Tales, a English mythology with stories and ideas and faux
Okay.
medieval magical characters and all of that stuff. This is what he calls his legendarium, which eventually becomes the Silmarillion, for which the Elvish languages could exist within, but that'll come later. This is just the inklings of it. In World War One, he's working on kind of a
Those are
book of
cool. Those are
yeah,
really cool names, but I'm like, I
yeah,
hope he didn't walk around telling people that because that
yeah. Oh, he
that's all.
did. Yeah, yeah.
Oh no.
So, yeah, World War One, demobilized in 1920. He had a rank of lieutenant by the end. He was
Whoa.
big in it, you know?
Yeah.
Um, Post-war, first job is at the Oxford English Dictionary, and he was
Ooh.
working on the W's, the history and etymology of Germanic origin words. So
Mhm.
figuring out walrus, where did that come from? How did it derive? Why is it, that was his first job
I
after
love
the
it.
war, and
Oh,
he
I love
toiled
it.
and toiled and loved it. And then the other thing, which we already talked about, was he did a translation of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is, if you remember, we were like, that's
Mm.
why people thought it was him who wrote that, because
Yes.
he did a good translation of it and got all the language origins. Because if we remember, that story is from Anonymous. It is a cobbled together
Yeah.
story of all sorts of European folklore.
No, I
Uh,
absolutely adored that, and his touch on it is very fascinating, especially
yeah.
seeing that studio go into some fantasy realm. But seeing his touch on a lot of this is just it's coincidence, but it's not at the same time. It's I loved that movie a couple years ago. Please go check out our episode on it
Yeah.
because it definitely intermingles and weaves with this.
Yeah, definitely. With the work that he's doing with that, then he works as a professor of Anglo-Saxon, the original language, as well as Old Norse literature. And he's, like I said, working in various departments and positions at Oxford and their
Wow.
offshoots, and taught for 34 years. That's what he's doing. And I would probably describe him, if you think about teachers, he was one of the good teachers. He's the cool English teacher or language teacher that
Yeah.
you would want. When he's reading Beowulf, he shouted at the start of it, so people, you feel like they said, one of the students said he could turn a lecture room into a mead hall. He was
Huh.
just so so into it.
Aw.
He was also kind of a goofball. Went to parties dressed as a polar bear, uh, dressed as an axe wielding Anglo-Saxon warrior.
Yeah.
A funny, goofy guy. Took out his false teeth a bunch.
Oh my god.
Like I said, one of the good ones, one of the fun
Wow.
ones that you would have wanted at Oxford in the 30s onward. Yeah.
Like, he's not, it's hard not knowing so much about him, and now understanding him fully is like, well, he's so much bigger and fuller than just like the kid thinking about wizards in the corner,
Yeah, yeah.
there's so much more to him than that, and it's fascinating to hear how big his character really was in real life, because I can imagine how much fun he would have been around. I mean, that really says it
Mhm.
all, is he could turn a lecture room into a mead hall. I
Yeah.
mean, that takes a special person, and that kind of tells you the magic that that happens when they start
Yeah.
trying to communicate, and not everybody communicates the same way.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it's perfect that you bring up the communication side of things too, because that was the onus for him wanting to write stories. Because, like we had talked about with Esperanto being built in a lab, he's like, the
yeah,
languages have to have, like, the reason a language because he's learning the origins of walrus, trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
There has to be some stories behind it. You can't just come up with a language out of
Right.
nothing. There has to be myths and legends and growth and changes, and the history behind why a word becomes the way it does comes from culture and
This
how
is how I
people
think
use
about
it.
storytelling. This is
Yeah.
exactly how I think about the storytelling and why we do this show. I mean, and this is fascinating to hear because it's fascinating to hear it in a mind like this. This is incredible.
Yeah. So what happens then is the languages that he's developing, these elvish languages and whatnot, he's more writing he has these ideas for stories to fit as a vessel so that the languages make sense.
Yeah.
It's like I said, it's sort of a backwards way of what you'd think. People are like, "Oh, I want to write a cool story," and then I put in this world building. He's like, "No, I invented a language, but it doesn't matter unless there's a culture that used it,
Yeah.
and let me write thousands of years of history for them, so that then I can have this language make sense." Which I had never thought of it that way, but it's pretty cool. So the first book that he tackles with this, like I said, he had his legendarium. He has all these bigger ideas and plans and
Yeah.
lore and whatnot, but he's got children of his own. And so his interest is shifting to mythology, legendary stories with
Mhm.
kids. And there's also some works that are dabbling in this fantastical realm before him. So just some of his influences. William Morris was a
Mm.
writer, more poet, and the style that he had really
Mhm.
influenced him, as well as his depiction of dragons and their destruction of landscapes and whatnot
Okay. Yeah.
was a big motif with Morris's writing. So that's number one. Sauron is based on the villain of Samuel Crockett's The Black Douglas, which is an early supernatural historical thing with werewolves and magic and such, which he was influenced by,
Ooh,
Tolkien
I
was
like that.
influenced by.
Yeah.
And the last one I'll cover is George MacDonald's The Princess and the Goblin. His depiction of
Mm.
goblins and those sorts of creatures were very influential to Tolkien as he was coming up with his
Ah.
non-human, creepy sort of characters in my mind, as well as, of course, the language stuff, tons of Old Norse names, Anglo-Saxon stuff, all of the stuff that he's using from what
Oh,
he was
yes.
pulling.
I'm because like that's been it's so especially jumping into the new series.
Mhm.
It's so rich that it almost glazes over. Like
Yeah.
everything is something, and so never and nothing is anything, and I don't even know where to start with anything. It's like this is how I need to really start is understanding him and his story and where the story is coming from, even just the understanding that it's stemming from trying to have a context for a language and communication.
Yeah.
Like all of that starts to now build the texture of what is the
Yeah. Yeah.
story. I'm just beginning to start placing things that without it it's just like, well, the whole donut's good, I guess. I don't know what's good about it. Yeah, this
Yeah.
is I'm starting to peel it back here. At least for me and how my mind works, understanding his influences and his context
Mhm.
and his goals with this help me understand it. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a full me thing. Everybody knows so much about this. I
No,
truly am
I wanted
behind
to
the
yeah.
ball on this.
No, I think it is important to realize that this was, in a way, an end of a different means when it comes to his language
Yeah.
background, which everybody knows. Oh, wow, he invented Elvish and he invented all the, whatever, but
Oh
it's
wow.
like this was the point of that. Yeah. So keeping in mind too the start of this, the apocryphal tale, he's still a teacher. He was grading papers. There were some blank parts on the back of one of them. He wrote, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit," and said, well, that's an interesting start. What's a hobbit? Why is he living there? What's going
Yeah.
on with that? And then writes the Hobbit as, like I said, more of a kid's story, a children's fantastical thing, because that's what he's interested in.
I'll
And
develop this. I'll develop
yeah,
the
yeah,
hell
sure.
out of it.
Takes a while though. Shows the manuscript to C.S. Lewis, one of his friends,
Oh,
and
casual.
yeah,
Convenient. As you
C.S.
do.
Lewis showed this to a student who was then visited by a staff member of a publishing company, who then showed it to her boss, and then he showed it to his 10-year-old son. So this chain of
Oh.
Tolkien wasn't chomping at the bit. I have to get this published. I've devoted my life to this. it was a changing of hands until it gets to a kid who said, I like this. This is fun. Dad
Wow.
published this.
Yeah, that happens way too often.
Mhm.
Oh man, how is it supposed to work?
Yeah. uh,
That's great.
I love it. Reminds me a little bit of the Harry Potter stuff where the kids are the litmus test for the quality of it. And if the kid wants to
Yep,
keep reading,
exactly.
yeah,
That's instantly what I thought of. It's like I've heard this several times actually.
yeah,
This is interesting, but
yeah. So they decide to publish it. 1937 is the date, and it sold out in 3 months. And
wow,
another piece, which you'll be happy to realize,
mm,
is that the original art was by Tolkien as well. He
really?
was he was an interested artist, and these copies, there weren't that many of them, and I looked it up. One of these in 2008 sold for 60,000 British
Oh
pounds
my
at
god,
auction. To have the original Hobbit with the art by the guy.
yeah,
Uh,
wow.
Not too many copies out there, so this
Is
is
there a
where he fits
PDF on the internet?
in. You can, yeah, print out really crappily. Um, well, so speaking of gaining in popularity, you want a copy. Everybody wants a copy. The publisher now wants a sequel, of course. Nothing
Uh-huh.
changes. Everything stays the same. What do you got next, guy? Uh, he shows this publisher the Silmarillion, like his legendarium of the lore and the genealogy and all that. And they're like, nah, too obscure. This isn't a sequel children's book. What the heck is all this garbage? They're
And
not that
next.
gruff, but it's like,
Sure.
I don't want, this is not what we want. So he says, well, I'll get something else to you,
Hmm.
which comes 17 years later, which ends up being Lord of the Rings. But in this
Holding
time,
on to that business card.
yeah, yeah,
Hope this number
basically.
ain't changed.
I thought it was interesting, though, because as he's working on Lord of the Rings, he wants to change The Hobbit, which is also why this first edition is
Mm.
expensive, because it's actually different. They did update The Hobbit. And so in this first
First draft.
edition, the more children's-y version, Gollum willingly bets his magic ring on the outcome of the riddle game in the
Mm.
cave, and he and
Mhm.
Bilbo part amicably. But in the second
Uh,
and further editions, and in the movies, if you've seen them, it's
spoiler
reflecting
alert.
more how corrupting the One Ring
Yes.
is and how dark it is. Tolkien makes Gollum more aggressive, and he's distraught, and Bilbo's stolen it, and all of that is not in the first edition. So
Wow.
that's kind of interesting that he also changed it, updated his
Wow.
story as he's getting the Lord of the Rings stuff figured out.
I like that he's not like feeling bound, that he's like, well, that was the first draft and now I can do it. You know what I mean? You're not
Yeah,
feeling
yeah,
like he has to
yeah.
justify it and be completely bound and contort to those
Well, and
decisions. Be like, well, I'm going to do it again now.
he definitely wanted to do more. So after The Lord of the Rings comes out, he started trying to revise the whole thing, all of The Hobbit again, to match Lord of the Rings more. And
Hmm.
then the publisher wasn't going for it. People were not going for it. There was too much criticism of losing the lightheartedness of The Hobbit. And so it never went through the official
Okay.
full
Okay.
revisions to after The Lord of the Rings came out. But it is interesting. I'm not sure many people know that he was still futzing with it even after,
Right.
to try and line it all up. In between, part of I think what is taking so long is World War II happens, and so very important that you get involved in that if you're in England at the time. And so he was
Right.
asked to serve in the cryptographic department of the Foreign Office for code breaking. Language extraordinaire
Ooh,
guy.
right up his alley.
But officially, they did not need his services. I would
No.
like to conspiracy theory that and say
Mm?
that they did use him, but obviously
We'll never know.
on
The
the books.
secret dies with Tolkien.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But he's still the professor of English and literature. Like I said, 17 years it takes to write after The Hobbit. What's funny is the 10-year-old kid is now involved in the publishing as an adult. Like you said, keep the business card,
That's how it
literally
happens.
the guy kept it. And then that's because you could imagine if there's a changing of the guard or it's not a family business, why would they keep up with this guy and this
I
sequel
keep
to this?
thinking of like
Yeah.
example, like other times this has happened. This is a completely different parallel, if you allow me to
Yeah.
aside.
Yeah.
But like this happened with the Halloween series. So famously, the Halloween IP was owned by Mustafa Akkad. He was the producer for all of the
Uh-huh.
sequels, and he had a teenage son in the 80s when they brought back Michael Myers for part 4, 5, 6. And he literally asked his son, yes, no, would teenagers like this in a movie? And so fast forward, guess who's producing these movies now?
Yeah.
His son,
Yeah.
Akkad. But I think he's a much better producer. These movies are much better. But that's all to say. This happens all the time.
Yeah.
This generational secession. It's fascinating actually, and that's just one and a major one that people like seriously are not aware of, and that's still happening.
Mhm.
But yeah, this happens all the time.
All the time, as well as the continued support from those around you, not just the business side of things. So C.S. Lewis is still encouraging him, and now C.S. Lewis is concurrently writing the Chronicles of Narnia at the same time
Good
he's
lord,
working on Lord of the Rings. So they're both in these big epic fantasy
it's a
allegories.
write off.
Yeah, yeah. And then this finally gets published in 54 in 3 volumes, which is more for the size and the commercial value, splitting it up as opposed to the narrative
And the flex, Taylor.
necessity of it that you can have so much. Yeah. But like I said, it was interesting because he did still, even though it grew darker and serious, but it was supposed to be the sequel to The Hobbit, so he wanted it to be more of a children's tale. And then
Hmm.
as it was progressing, and then of course influences with World War II now, it grew darker as time went
Things
on.
didn't get better. The story
Yeah,
didn't get better.
yeah. And I saw that Frodo was originally named Bingo in the
I wish they'd kept it.
yeah, yeah. It didn't work. Didn't work in the darker version. Yeah, but in the children's version that he started as the sequel to The Hobbit, he was old Bingo.
That's
So
hilarious.
yeah.
That's my favorite discrepancy thus far.
um, and then he retires 5 years later in 59 and until 73, and basically increases slowly. The snowball builds in terms of his public awareness, fame, the book selling. And he actually said he regretted not retiring earlier since his books did become so profitable. He was like, I could have
Mm,
done more of this and not taught as much as I did. And
interesting.
very giving, very loving, completely glossed over his relationship with his wife, which he's had forever. But he moved off to the seaside, lives in seclusion and isolation, mostly because his wife loved being there and she could be a hostess in
Hmm.
polite society, and he's not in the scene anymore. And he's
Hmm.
okay with that. And he's just chilling on the beach, going to parties that his wife is hosting and living out his days.
Same.
Um, and then, yeah, yeah, that's the dream there. What I thought was kind of the question of the whole thing. This grew immensely popular in the 60s when he was done, makes no sense. And he's off sitting on the beach with his feet in the sand. He's not on talk shows promoting this. He's not coming out with more. The Cimmerillion, the big old Rolodex of ideas and characters and lore was published posthumously in
Oh
77.
wow.
So he didn't even it was his son. He didn't even have anything to do with that. But the reason it became so big in the 60s was, we talk about the 60s all the time, the counterculture boom, the interest in environmental issues, which wasn't extremely overt in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but it's much more than what most other people were doing at the time.
Right.
This sort of, cutting down the trees, big industrialist faction that's decimating the land.
The more we do the show, the more
Yeah.
we add to the prism that is the 1960s.
Yeah, yeah.
The 1960s just galvanized and compounded and through the trajectory of this country and the world in some really wild ways. And we keep talking about the decade. We could just do a super show on the 1960s and how
Yeah.
content changed before and after the 1960s. But I digress.
But yeah, with your conception of the 60s, now also put all the college campus hippies having a copy of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit under their arm
Mhm,
as they're going to
mhm.
protest and
We're
whatnot.
armed with the
This is also
truth.
yeah, it's there, it's there. And, you know, he was, not super into that, didn't really care that that was a part of it, was not interested in that as an aspect of what people were getting out of his
Oh.
work. 'Cause he's the language guy. He's like, "This has nothing to do with any of that."
Oh, man. That's
Yeah.
I almost feel like it was, like, mistiming. I feel like he would've been, like, way into all of this if it had happened, like, when he was you know what
Right,
I
if he
mean?
wasn't
And
born in 1892, yeah, yeah.
yeah. If it's almost feel like it all got popular after he was like, "Well, I guess nobody liked it."
Right, like Frank Herbert in Dune, he's like, "No, no, no, I was about that. That's what I was about. That's why I wrote it." Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
exactly. One more little bit before we get into them turning this into trying to movies and
yeah.
shows and whatnot. The C.S. Lewis friendship was cooled a little bit over time because of C.S. Lewis's anti-Catholic leanings and
Oh,
having
no.
his opening his mind to Christianity and whatnot. Although they were still together as this Inklings group in England and Oxford,
Mhm,
because Tolkien was very, very Catholic, which I think is also
mhm,
probably represented in the structure of his works. But
mhm.
the other thing then too, which we also talked about in Nightmare Alley, was this also is the time C.S. Lewis is romancing the American divorcee William Lindsay Gresham's wife, and
Oh
they
my
remember
gosh.
when she has cancer and he's care you know that was the
The
guy who wrote
scandal.
Nightmare Alley.
Oh,
Yeah, that was his
yes.
wife. That was that whole side thing. So that again weaving into Tolkien's story, he's
Oh my
losing his
god.
friendship with C.S. Lewis because he's with her at this time,
Oh my
and
gosh.
yeah, that's that's kind of the tail end of his life and what's going on. We can pop into his thoughts on adapting this and what was tried to be done before the things we know and love,
Yeah.
starting with in 51, there's a quote from Tolkien writing about his intentions. He said, to create, quote, a body of more or less connected legend of which the cycles should be linked to a majestic whole and yet leave scope for other minds and hands wielding paint and music and drama. So he thought of it in a sense
I
as,
feel like that's like a studio's mission statement.
yeah, they want every project to be able to have that happen. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Right? You know, like
And we can have
I
toys and
like
lunchboxes. Yeah, yeah.
I'm like yeah, that all sound yeah. Where would I feel like all those values are present? No, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I want to reappropriate that everywhere.
I think what was his take on it though was more like, oh, people can write poems in the Elvish language, not make a
Totally,
third,
totally.
you know, like, and
He's talking about I
yeah,
want to make a sandbox big enough for everybody to do what they want.
yeah, and we can have all this connected lore and create operas about
Yeah,
things that are happening and whatnot.
we're in the sandbox.
What's missing from that is film. He was not keen on film. He was not really. He didn't watch
Oh,
shows
so
or
he's film
TV.
racist.
You know, yeah,
That's
yeah,
fascinating. I'm
basically,
now that he's getting old. Now we've gotten to his older prime. I'm interested to see him getting older and where he draws the line on
yeah,
things. As people
yeah.
get into their curmudgeon phase,
Because that's what
this
he
is
said, yeah,
fascinating.
wielding paint and music and drama. He's not as interested in the film stuff. And
He'd be holding on to VHS. No,
right, his his creative then power is that he can have veto on all creative decisions as it comes
mm-hmm,
to these
mm-hmm.
adapting of these things. So we'll start with The Hobbit and what had tried to be done with that in 38, and The Hobbit came out in 37. So pretty
Right
close.
immediately. Wow.
There was a memo, which is not substantiated by Tolkien's estate as far as they were not clued into this, but there is
Hmm.
internal memos with Walt Disney suggesting The Hobbit be incorporated into Fantasia as one of the
Mm.
sequences using that
I
with
can see that
music.
immediately. Yeah.
But it never made it to Tolkien's desk as far as
Yeah.
approved. But he didn't like Disney at all, anyways. So I doubt that there would have been anything. But
Yeah.
there was also, again, another uptick in the 50s. There were rumors storyboard artists were saying that they were working on something, but it was too complex and they didn't have the rights anyway. And like I said, Tolkien loathed Disney. So it's not like it would have been
Hmm.
going anywhere, anyways. But it was in their wheelhouse and contemplations, at least. But all
It's like
through the
everyone's
yeah,
Akira now.
right.
All
That it
the
can't be done.
animators,
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
graphic designers, like hide that and shuffle it under papers when you walk in a room. Like, no, 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 just this. No, it's more versions of a new Sonic.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that, there's attempts all through the 50s, negotiations and whatnot. The first official adaptation was a play version, a 1953 production at St. Margaret's Girls' School, which is
Hmm.
interesting because it was all girls,
Okay.
which then kind of the well, which we'll get into later, but it's a very masculine centered story and cast and
I feel
everything.
like immediately, I don't know anything about this, but off the premise alone, this could be a 90-minute movie. This could be an
Right.
incredible movie. Just
But it's
about
just so funny
throwing this
that
play and who
the
these
people
girls
yeah.
are and what this school is. I see it.
We'll get into the up in arms of the casting and the his
Yes.
ideas of mythology. It's just funny that the first adaptation was all female
I
because it
love it.
was a girls' school. So
I'll write
yeah, keep that in the
a
fact in
spec
the
script about that. Just
yeah.
about that.
The first other film version was a 66 cartoon, 12 minutes long, and again, this is all The Hobbit.
Hmm.
And looked into it, not really similar at all. It's there's a princess with Bilbo going on this thing. It has nothing to do with anything at all. And the animation is
More
garbage.
closely resembles Shrek.
Or yeah, Super Mario or something. Yeah, it's strange. The it's basically just like camera movements over still photos, like a glorified Ken Burns documentary
Fascinating.
thing. What happened was, and I don't know all the specifics, but there was a gaffe with the rights because of the US first edition publishing. And so somehow part of that got in the public domain. And so they could make
Oh
anything with it, but
Lord.
they were trying to quickly figure out how they could do it, this company. And then they were working on something and then they didn't have anything. And so they're like, hurry, we got to get something out before this gets canned or we can't do
They
this.
bumbled it.
So that's why they said "Yeah, anything, and then it's just this weird 12-minute almost slideshow
No.
animation of it.
Dang.
There were a bunch of radio dramas that were approved, and the BBC has one. They end up being pretty good. I've listened to them. You can find them
That's cool.
out there on the interwebs. But
Yeah.
the Lord of the Rings, then he sold the and this is you had talked about his curmudgeonliness. It's kind of interesting. He sold the film stage and merchandise rights to United Artists in 1968. Nothing came to be from this, but the reasoning is he was planning the trust fund for his grandkids. His wife was ailing. He was
Mm.
worried about the fall off from the book sales, which didn't happen. But this is 68, and he doesn't know what's to
Yeah.
be of him
Yeah.
and his legacy in the future. And so a smart business decision, but to be like, sure, I'll sell it all for this so that we can get something from this, but
Oh
sold it
Lord.
all to United Artists in 68.
Oh
And
God.
they end up not doing anything with it. So the first film adaptation does not come from them. And this again has to do with this weird public domain situation from the settlement from that. And so there's this company that jumps on it, Rankin Bass, and
Okay.
but although there's like a stipulation that it could only air in Canada, it's
What?
just weird. But
Oh
this is the
Lord. Oh
first
no.
version that's animated and actually put together. It isn't that weird short. And this is in 77, and it is a musical TV film of The Hobbit. And it's probably what people have seen as like, oh, these weird drawings. I'll post a link. But if people are like, oh God, there was some other weird Lord of the Rings Hobbit thing before Peter Jackson, this is what that is. And it again comes from spurious circumstances and strange rights litigation and trying to beat another company to getting something out there. So that's
Oh, what a
77.
strange shape you are.
Yeah. And again, nothing to do with what Tolkien wants at all.
Lord.
And he's not getting anything from this because United Artists still has the actual rights. And so they do end up going for something. They sell the rights to this guy, Ralph Bakshi, for $3 million because they failed so much to try and get something. And he does The Lord of the Rings, the first half of it. And this comes out a year later in 78. And this is another animated thing, which it does more justice as far as being animated well and isn't a musical television film.
Good God.
But it never gets a part 2. They never never get
No.
off
Are
the ground.
you
It ends on a
kidding?
massive cliffhanger. Yeah, and
Oh.
he's trying to get
Oh,
it done before the Rankin Bass TV people come back with their weird rights issue, and they're like swiftly trying to do another one,
oh
and
my
and
god.
so 2 years later they do capitalize, and Rankin Bass basically does Lord of the Rings again, and they just do it as the whole story instead of finishing his second half,
Okay.
which he was trying to do. It's called Frodo the Hobbit 2, and it's just all
What?
the Lord of the Rings. It's not the second part of what this other guy had with the
Oh
rights.
my god.
So this all just becomes a huge mess where
Bumble after bumble
yeah,
after bumble.
yeah, and then people are associating this weird second one with the one that this guy did that he actually tried to do a good job on, Ralph. Uh
All the fans going, "It's impossible. You can't do it. Just stop."
yeah, and
For
so
decades.
again, also it ties into the fact that Tolkien died in 73. He did not see these,
Yeah.
but he hated the fans and the American fans and what they were perceiving it as, and not into it becoming this junk, you know? He wants a whole
No.
connected, majestic whole in the scope of paint and music and drama, and we're getting TV animated musicals towards the end. uh, it doesn't gel with what people saw it as in the book, so
Well, it's fascinating that there are multiple animated misfires. So I'm not
yeah.
even I guess so it's the it's the middle one that we're more probably acquainted with
Right.
visually.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um
yeah. The unfinished one. Yeah.
Good God, and I had no idea it was unfinished. Yeah, I mean, I seriously for decades now, you've got a fan base that the author disowns and a fan base that is screaming about how it's impossible to adapt, so why even try? All the while, it's hardly even gotten like a real like good shake at it because
Mhm.
ultimately all of this entertainment junk is in its infancy as we go through
Yeah.
the 50s, 60s into the 70s and bordering into the 80s. And by the
Well, and
time you
also
get the
70s,
third
80s.
adaptation done.
Yeah, 70s, 80s is not a great time for animation in general.
Right.
Yeah. Go back to our Who
Um,
Framed Roger Rabbit to see they they revitalized it, but this is before that, and you could imagine that's also part of just adding to what
the
you're saying about
wasteland
where it's
of
a mess. Yeah.
cartoons.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah, what a sticky and awful situation because nobody likes any nope like the author doesn't like the fans, don't like the content, don't like nobody wants anything to do with each other, which is bizarre.
And somebody's just sitting on all the rights and can't do anything with it, and they don't
Uh
want to. Yeah.
it's $3 million. You know, they spend more than that on like a shot in this new one. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
it's hard to reconcile exactly the magnitude of things that are shifting, bordering into the 1980s. I had no idea it was in such a horrible state
Yeah.
before Peter Jackson really comes along and starts developing it in the 90s, which I'm jumping the gun there, but like I knew it wasn't good and I knew that there was an attempt. I didn't know there were so many attempts. I didn't
Mhm.
know that attempts went unfinished, which is absolutely gobsmackingly unbelievable.
Well, they patch it
Um
together with a little voiceover at the end, and they're like,
oh
"And the
good.
piece right there." Yeah, this
Oh
is literally
yeah.
one line at the end
Oh thank
because they
God.
couldn't.
So they
But it
fixed it.
but it doesn't work.
No, I know.
Obviously,
I
they're
know.
in peril, yeah, and nothing is resolved, but they just said, "It's over," and
Wow.
everything worked
I'm
out,
just
yeah.
yeah, this is staggering. And it's also funny too. Just I feel like we're such creatures of our times because I feel like Tolkien is misunderstanding the fans,
Mhm.
and the fans are really misunderstanding the filmmakers and the creators because
Which
I don't
yeah.
think they're on different sides of the argument. I think everybody is understanding each other. The point being that they like this, they like this story and they see something in it. And I don't think that really people are disagreeing about what it intrinsically is. They just end up drawn on stupid political sides. So the hippie idea, the hippie aesthetic hurts the perception of the fans in Tolkien's eyes, which is
Yeah.
lunacy in my mind because now in my mind he's getting old enough it didn't catch on when he was excited about it, now he's older, And
Yeah.
he doesn't want, that's not my crowd, but it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is, because the book is under their arm and no one else's. Yes, they are. They know what you're talking about. So I
Yeah.
think we're creatures of our time, and it's funny to see him kind of get just stuck like flag in the sand, 1940s and 50s, and his ideals stay there basically.
Yeah. It
This
was a
is
bit
fascinating.
too far. Yeah, yeah. We'll probably get into that in our third part when we talk about the knockoff effects and the fans and the new one, and like you said, what people want.
Right.
Uh,
I'm trying to put my mind in like a fan in 1979. That is what
yeah.
I'm like speaking to right now, is that they probably have this very like elitist, like, no, the books are incredible. It's not even possible. Why would you even think about it? They go,
Yeah.
stop.
Oh God, a musical number. What the
Yeah.
heck? Yeah.
You know, like the Star Wars specials happen in the same year,
Yeah.
basically, you
This
know,
is
like
that.
that.
This is that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But next week we will have the answer, the tumultuous how did a nobody Peter Jackson at the time get a property that seems impossible with a fan base that's conflicted and an author who will never give up the rights. We will figure out how it became the biggest fantastical trilogy of all time.
Oh man, thank you, Taylor. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I seriously, this is all making so much more sense now. I feel like I can step into a new episode of the show with a little bit of clearer head. I can watch. I'm really now I've got some context, and I can't wait to follow this up next week. Thank you guys for sticking around. Thank you for sticking around after our break. We've never taken more than a week off, really. So bear with us over the course of now. What is this, Taylor? We're
on episode
beating,
180. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're beating down the door at 200. So let us know what you are reading. Let us know what you were watching. Let us know what you were excited about coming out in theaters, on streaming. You never know when we're going to do an episode about that thing you want to know all about. Get in touch with us at illiteratepod@gmail.com, and we will see you here back next week. Until then, stay safe, everyone.